Lucky you.
36 best
Tune
holes in
into
golf.
Alternate Shots podcast,
Barney's Army.
where we talk about golf,
Sandy.
poker,
James Bond.
horse racing,
Double.
classic movies.
Zenyatta.
We have no script.
Down the stretch they
And
come.
we are glad you joined us.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Billy Regan, boy, what a day.
Bobby Williams.
What a day in spring. We have Matt Venturi, who we've known many, many years. And gosh, he spans, I would think, from modern day golf all the way back to Gene Saracen. Not that he's that old, but he has stories that reach back. And we're going to hope to learn all of those stories today. Thanks for jumping on the Alternate Shots podcast. Billy,
great.
Anything to add to that?
I think Matt is a great guy, and I want to know more about his dad, who, from every story and every person I've ever heard that had any contact with him or didn't, he was a class act on and off the course and on and off the microphone. So I look forward to learning
Bill.
more about a man who probably should be more recognized, or maybe he is more recognized than I realized, but I know I admired him.
Well, thank you very much. He was blessed in many ways, and friendships were probably the way that he was able to enjoy life most. So it's nice to be thought of fondly and appreciate those nice words. Thanks, Billy. Thank you.
Yeah. So Billy and I have been thinking and talking a little bit. We think of your dad and your family and how your family's affected golf, but also popular culture. I don't know if I said that right, but Ricky Fowler is a popular star. He's also a fantastic golfer, but he's had a lot of tools to work with. Your dad might have done this one person at a time, but I remember somewhere reading that when he was 13, I guess his teacher told he had a challenge and that, he's never going to overcome that. Maybe you could talk about that, the start in his life, which is kind of ironic to his second part of his life, where we all may have know a lot of him as far as a commentator. Why don't you talk about that start in life?
Yeah, I think Bob talking about how he had a terrible stuttering problem growing up. He really couldn't speak. Used to come home after being in fist fights. Kids would beat him up, and he'd hold his own. But he became a loner, and so he started playing golf because it was the way he thought he could teach himself how to speak, as if he had a gallery that he would speak to, and that's how. And he said he picked a lonely game that he knew, and he started playing golf. My grandfather was doing some. He was working down in on the docks, but spent time at Harding Park, and that's how my dad was able to get out at Harding Park and start playing. So he started with that and taught himself how to speak. And he was a man of few words over the years as a younger man. There were times like at the Masters when I think Cliff Roberts was upset because he didn't have a lot to say after you were talking about earlier. He led as an amateur for all three days in the 56 Masters, and then shot 80 the last day and lost by a stroke. And he kind of got out of there without saying much. And Cliff Roberts, I think, was somewhat insulted by him not spending more time in front of the press. And that was a time that Eddie Lowry ended up writing a letter to Augusta National apologizing for my dad and signed my dad's name to it, which my dad never forgot. But and then 58 was a kind of a controversial year that year when Arnold had a drop and Clifford Roberts just, made the ruling. And then there was a lot of history there that eventually, when he did, as you said, he got in the broadcast business, it was a whole nother life there. And even at the Masters, Cliff Roberts wasn't sure that, my dad should broadcast because of all the memories. In 1960, he lost by a stroke to Arnold. Arnold rallied in the last 3 holes and beat him by a stroke in 60. Frank Chirkinian told Clifford, he said, no, he said, he'll do a great job. And he did for 35 years. And Dick Ryan had a lot to do with that too, to help put that contract together and get him into the broadcast booth. And the Masters, was classic with Jimmy Nance and everybody else over the years that he was able to work with.
He was an amateur. And then there was some incident that made him turn pro.
It was really that event there, Bill, that after 56 Masters, because 56 he came back from the war. He was in Austria, and he won the San Francisco City Championship. Harvey Ward had won it in 55. My dad took it back in 56. That night I was born, and Harvey was at the hospital with my dad when I was born. San Francisco
Is
General.
Harvey your godfather?
No, actually, Byron Nelson was my
Byron
guy.
Nelson's your godfather. Okay.
Yeah. So Harvey was there, and then they played the Bing Crosby Pro-Am that year, the next month, and that's when the match was set up. And then it was after that next month in April when he played in the 56 Masters. He actually played in the 54 Masters. He was stationed out of Fort Ord in Monterey, California, and the last couple of weeks he was in boot camp. And Bobby Jones wrote a letter to the U.S. Army general asking for permission for him to leave, which they gave him. And so he played in the 54 Masters. That was the first time he ever played. And then he came back to the boot camp, and the staff sergeant said, "You think you're a tough guy?" He put him through boot camp again because he had the privilege. And then he was shipped overseas to Austria.
I want to just go back a few years before the 50s. So he was 13 when he decided to play the sport of golf. Was he playing before then, or is that about when he started playing?
Yeah, about 12, 13 years old is when I think he first picked up a club when he was about 12.
Yeah, I heard he picked up some hickory shafted clubs or whatever. But when did he get decent at it? When could he shoot around par?
Yeah, 16, 17, he was playing in a number of the juniors, competing in the city championship. By the time he was 16, 17, he was hitting it pretty good. And
So late 40s.
Self-taught.
So I'm not sure we got to the answer. Why did he go pro? Was it because of the whole thing with the match with the fellas that set that up, and Harvey and he were amateurs? We don't
Or
have to
was it, or
Yeah.
was he intending to be a pro all along?
Right.
Yeah, I think no, I think he was planning on staying amateur status. I think that was really the preferred approach anyway. But after the 56 Masters, that was a turning point, and he felt that he that really made him want to go out and compete as a professional. So it was after that he ended up becoming a professional. But that was the turning point.
And was that about the time when it was becoming more lucrative to be a professional golfer? Because I know earlier than that, there was no money in it.
Yeah, not much. I tell you, he in 1958, I think he was the number 2 money winner, and he won $6,500 the whole year. So there
Right.
wasn't much in it. But I think at that time there was some transitioning with Lowry and Eddie Lowry with the issues, with the USGA. And I think, he didn't want to, he felt, look, if I'm going to compete, I'm going to get paid, I'm going to do it as a professional. Because there's a lot of scrutiny being placed on the amateur status and compensation issue.
Right.
Have to put up their own money to win their own money. It's an interesting time, and Palmer gets so much credit. He does deserve credit. But I never hear a lot of credit given to Ken, because he was a superstar then, and people wanted to see him. He was a popular figure. Like, he hung out with DiMaggio, he hung out with the Sinatra, right? And all the people that
But
everybody.
he made that
liked.
transition from amateur to pro, and certainly made it look more attractive, I would guess, to people younger than him.
Yeah, I think the athletes in those days, they tend to hang together and party together and play together. And I didn't see much of them growing up. I mean, I travel a little bit on tour and come out and stay out here with the Santangelos and the Dratties on occasion. But he wasn't home much, and so that was his life. And I think practicing and living it day in and day out. That's the way these athletes were. I mean, his pinnacle was the 64 U.S. Open when he won that at Congressional, and then got Sportsman of the Year that year too, which was great, for him. But it was downhill after that, because that's when his hands went bad. But the life of a pro was a hard life.
How many people know that? Your dad was at the height of his career, and then he got what people get today by working on computers too much, carpal tunnel syndrome.
That's right. They really didn't know what it was then, Bob. It was they went to Mayo Clinic, and he always told the story about how his father, my grandfather Fred, who worked at Harding Park and was kind of his guide over the years, and he never really said anything. My dad, complimented him, or just was always pretty tough on him. But he was driving him to the airport that day to take him to Mayo Clinic for his operation, and my dad said to my grandfather, he goes, Dad, he goes, I don't know if I may never play again. They're going to cut me open. I don't know, I may never play. And my grandfather said, "It doesn't matter, son." And he said, "Well, what do you mean it doesn't matter?" He says, "You were the best I ever saw." And that was my dad's kind of vote of confidence to go in. He went to Mayo Clinic. They cut him open. They were pumping him with cortisone. It was a big test in those days. They had no idea. And so they did a cut him both wrists, and the left one came back, the right one didn't, and he had atrophy in the right hand. And there was a doctor in Akron, Ohio, Dr. Walter Hoyt, used to stay with him, a wonderful family. He ended up cutting him open and seeing that the scar tissue from the previous operation had grown over those tendons, because otherwise they were going to amputate a couple of his fingers. But, after 65, that was his last tour victory. It was the San Francisco Invitational, Harding Park, as a matter of fact, where he started his career, ended his career. And then he went in for the operation and never really could get his hands back. And, it's all about your hands, and so, and the TV ended up being a great, kind of soft landing for him to move into.
Yeah,
He hit that hard, though. I mean, he was as good as you get in commentary.
Yeah, we'll get to that one. The interesting thing here is that looks like he came in second at the Masters of Palmer.
Yeah, so, 58. He actually 58. He wasn't second, but Arnold won at 58, and then 60 he lost. Arnold, they had him in the Butler cabin, my dad, getting ready for the green jacket, and Arnold was on 16, the par 3, and he was above the hole in the green, and he putted. And in those days, you could keep the flag in, and if the flag hadn't been in, the ball was going in the pond. And so it stopped. He made par, and then he went birdie on 17, 18, and beat my dad by a stroke. And that was actually, my mom always said that was the heartbreak, because 58, my dad was playing with Arnold, and they were on the 12th hole, and this is where Arnold had a plug ball that he thought, and he asked the official for a ruling, and the official said, "Well, no, it's not plugged." Yeah. So he chips the ball, comes up short, putts it, misses the putt, puts it in the hole, and then says, "I don't think that was a good call, so I'm going to play another ball." So he drops another ball, plays a provisional, makes par, and they're walking to the 13th tee, and Arnold says, "My dad, they're not going to let that second ball stand." And my dad said, "You bet they're not, because you don't get a second look at the hole. You already, exactly. If you tipped the first one in, you wouldn't have played a second." But Clifford Roberts ended up ruling that the second ball stood, and my dad was very upset about that ruling. And but I think he lost by 2 strokes that year. But that year, getting back to this, I think 58, when Clifford Roberts made that call, I think it had something to do with the 56 event when my dad exited and didn't say much, because again, his speech and everything, he didn't say much. And when Eddie Lowry wrote that letter, and I think Clifford ran Augusta with the iron fist, and so what they said went. And so that ruling, my dad was very upset over the years with Arnold. He and Arnold ended up eventually making amends here, and but my dad was very upset about that. Yeah, 10-1. If he led all 3 days as an amateur in 56, and when they paired him with Sam Snead instead of Byron Nelson, because the tradition was to pair him with the low amateur with Byron Nelson, and Clifford Roberts said, it would be a shallow victory if he played with Byron and won. So they paired him with Sam Snead, and he shot 80 the last day and lost by a stroke. But if he had played with Byron, I can tell you, dollars of donuts, he would have won it. But people may have said that Byron was coaching him around, but there was a lot of integrity there. Byron was a great mentor. He from when he first met Byron through Eddie Lowry and really broke his swing down and rebuilt it. Byron always had some wonderful philosophies, and one was always ask what the course record is and who owns it, and if the local pro owns it, you never break it, because he lives there and you don't. You're just visiting, and things like that. He learned from these men, great gentlemen of the game, and they wouldn't have bended the rules ever.
Billy, you want to ask your question about Westchester? Didn't your father?
Well, no, that sort of answered the question, because I always heard the story about him with a wedge into the 18 at Westchester, and the same thing. The club pro had the, I think he pars it for course record, and the pro had the course record, so he picked the ball up and put it in his pocket. I don't know if that's exactly how that happened, but when I heard that, just the mere concept of it, and you just reiterated it, is awesome. That's a class that's a class act that can't be taught.
Well,
That's
that was,
something
and that
that's
wasn't in
inside people.
competition though, right, Bill? That was
No, 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 not in the competition's
Yeah.
a different
Yeah.
story altogether.
No, that's right. Well, actually, real quick. So I was listening to the match, and my dad was supposed to play with Art Bell, who was the pro at Pebble, became the pro at California Golf Club later, and my dad was playing one day again, casual round with Art Bell at Cal Club with Eddie Lowry, and anyway, long story short, he's going to break Art Bell's record, and Art's the pro there, and so Eddie goes, "What are you doing? You can't do this on the 18th hole." He goes, "Don't worry." So he ends up, putts and misses the putt and ties the record, 63. And they walk off, and Art Bell says to him, "I knew you'd choke." He said to my dad. But when you look at the board, it says Art Bell 63, Ken Venturi 63, tied 3 times.
Came to play and do some work with Don Scott at Wingfoot in the early 70s. Played 10 holes on the East from the plaques. Hit every green in regulation, the 8th East, the par 5 into the 2nd East into. He was 1 over par. He hit everything on the green. His putting wasn't any good. I attributed that to his condition with his hands, right? And I knew he was a good putter in his day, but
yeah, well, you think about Don Scott and getting out of those traps and how good he was. When a little bit later, when I was 8, 9 years old, traveling when he was on the tour still playing, and he did lose the touch in his hand. So I used to literally, Bob, I used to root for him to hit it in the trap, not on the green, because he could get up and down out of the trap better than he could on the greens. He 3-putt, Yeah, that's ball striking. I digress 1 second real quick. I tell you this great. So I get a call about 3 years ago from this woman, and she goes, "Are you Matt Venturi?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Was that your dad, Ken Venturi?" I said, "Yeah, he was." She goes, "Well, I have something I think you'd like to have." And I said, "Well, what is it?" And she says, "Well, I was cleaning out the attic of a good friend of mine, and I found this manuscript, and I want to send it to you." So she sends me this manuscript. This manuscript is from 1967. It's all typed on parchment paper. It's got a contract with Prentice Hall. And it was with Oscar Farley, who helped write my dad's book, Comeback, after he won the U.S. Open. And it's from 1967 with about 150 still high resolution black and white pictures and it's a book, and it's entitled Tips for the Expert Golfer. And it's a time capsule. It was lost. And I've got this, and getting back to your point about ball striking, all his tips from Hogan and Nelson, everything, are in this piece that has been sitting there since 1967, this attic, because the gal who's moving, her husband passed away, and he was the person with Prentice Hall, and everybody forgot about it.
Wow.
So get back to, where those tips came from when he taught himself how to play, and then Eddie Lowry had Byron Nelson help him, literally broke his swing down and came back. I mean, all those fundamentals were just grounded in that tradition. I think the swing's a little different now, but he could do anything with the ball. He can make the ball jump twice and go left. He can make it jump and pull back. He can make it go right. I mean, it was unbelievable what kind of feel he had when he had his hands.
I asked him a simple question. I think it was on 90 streets between the 6 and the 7. I said, "Do you like to hit a hard 7 or an easy 6? He says, "Bobby, if I'm inside a 3-wood, I always take the longer club."
Yeah.
He never muscled anything. So he taught himself, but then he was influenced by Byron Nelson, and he broke a swing down. So Billy Harmon told Billy Regan and I, Claude Harmon learned how to change his swing because he had a big hook when he came to Wingfoot in 1941. He learned from Craig Wood how to swing. He learned from Ben Hogan how to get around a golf course. Did your father have like kind of experience with some of those pros?
Mostly with Byron, because they did travel and did some exhibitions together that, again, Ed Lowry had set up early on. They really didn't know what it was then, Bob. It was, they went to Mayo Clinic, and he always told the story about how his father, my grandfather, Fred, who worked at Harding Park and was kind of his guide over the years, and he never really said anything. My dad, complimented him or just was always pretty tough on him, but he was driving him to the airport that day to take him to Mayo Clinic for his operation. And my dad said to my grandfather, he goes, "Dad," he goes, "I don't know if I may never play again. They're going to cut me open. I don't know, I may never play." And And my grandfather said, "It doesn't matter, son." And he said, "Well, what do you mean it doesn't matter?" He says, "You were the best I ever saw."
Thanks for joining us
Casper.
today.
Billy
We
Harmon,
really appreciate your
Double
feedback.
Indemnity,
And please
Arky,
subscribe to the
Two
show
Outer,
and hit the
Claude
bell
Harmon,
icon so you get notified
Movie
of
Classics,
new episodes.
Mark Gable,
Hit 'em
Odd
hard
Job,
and hit 'em often.
Best 36 Holes.